My name is Genesis Knight. The eviction notice was taped to the front door of my small bakery, half covered in fresh snow. It was the last day, the absolute final day I would ever open Hayes Bakery in downtown Sioux Falls. The rent had been jacked up one too many times by the new owner, a shell company I knew was controlled by my brother-in-law. I had already boxed up Grandma's old recipe cards and turned off the ovens for good. A few regular customers had stopped by earlier to say goodbye, hugging me with quiet, sad eyes before disappearing into the blowing snow. Now the place was empty, the lights dim, the silence heavy. Then a black SUV pulled up outside. Two women stepped out into the swirling flakes, boots crunching on the salted sidewalk. They pushed open the door, bringing in a rush of cold air as they shook snow from their coats. The younger one looked straight at me. Something about her eyes, sharp, warm, familiar, stopped me cold. She smiled, just a small curve of her lips, like she already knew every secret I'd been carrying for 20 years. 20 years ago, I fed a homeless girl in my small bakery. Now, as my life fell apart and my shop was about to close on the very last day of business, two strangers walked in, and the truth was finally revealed. This is the story of how one simple act of kindness tore my family apart and then saved everything I had left. If you're enjoying this story already, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It really helps keep these stories coming. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Let me take you back to where it all began 20 years ago. That fall when the golden leaves started falling thick on the streets of Sioux Falls. I was around 30 then, fresh out of baking school with more dreams than money, and I had come back home to help take care of Grandma Thelma. She had been getting weaker all summer, her heart condition making even simple things tiring. I remember sitting with her in the evenings on the porch of the old house watching the sun set over the prairie horizon while she told stories about opening the bakery back when downtown was just a few shops and dirt roads. Her hands, wrinkled but steady, would hold mine as she talked about recipes passed down from her own mother and how the smell of fresh bread could make any day better. Those moments felt precious even as I saw her energy fading day by day. My older sister Tamara Santos would drop by often enough, always with that polished smile and questions about how Grandma was feeling. But I noticed how her conversations drifted toward the house, the savings, the future, like she was already measuring what might come next. Tamara had moved away years earlier, building a life with her husband in a bigger home, on the outskirts filled with new furniture and plans for expansion. When she visited, she brought small gifts or groceries, but her eyes would linger on the family photos on the wall or the deed papers Grandma kept in the drawer. It wasn't overt, just subtle hints about making sure everything is in order or thinking about what comes after. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it was just concern, but something in her tone made me uneasy. Grandma Thelma passed peacefully in her sleep one night. The doctor said it was simply old age, nothing unexpected for someone her age, and there was no question about it. I found her in the morning looking serene with a faint smile, as if she had just drifted off after a good story. The loss hit me like a quiet wave, washing away the busyness of daily care and leaving only emptiness. We buried her quietly the way she would have wanted, with just family and a few close friends at the small cemetery on the edge of town. The wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant snow as we stood there, heads bowed, and I held on to the memory of her laugh echoing in the bakery kitchen. A week later, we sat in the lawyer's office downtown to hear the will read. The room smelled of old paper and coffee, the kind of place where serious things are settled without fanfare. Tamara got the big family house on the hill, and most of the savings Grandma had carefully put aside over decades, money earned from long hours behind the counter pinching pennies to make ends meet. I received the little bakery downtown, the one Grandma had run for years, with its worn wooden floors and glass cases that still held the ghosts of thousands of loaves and pastries, along with a 50-year lease she had signed back in the day, locking in a low fixed rent that no one could touch. She had always been proud of that lease, telling me it was her way of making sure the place stayed in the family, protected from rising costs or greedy buyers. Hearing it read aloud brought tears to my eyes. It felt like Grandma's final hug, her trust in me to carry on what she loved most. Right after the funeral, Larry Santos, Tamara's husband, a local real estate developer who always seemed to know which properties were about to go up in value, pulled me aside. We were still in the church hall, surrounded by plates of casseroles from neighbors, when he leaned in with that confident nod. He offered to buy out the lease for a price that sounded generous to him, but felt insultingly low to me, enough for a small down payment on something new, but nowhere near what the location might be worth someday. He said it would help me get out from under the burden and start fresh, framing it as a favor, a practical step forward. I could see Tamara standing nearby, watching with quiet approval. But the thought of selling twisted something inside me. The bakery wasn't a burden. It was home. It was Grandma's legacy, the place where I had spent childhood afternoons kneading dough beside her, learning not just recipes, but resilience. I thanked him but said no, as politely as I could. The bakery was all I had left of Grandma, and I believed I could make it work on my own. I pictured reopening the doors, filling the air with cinnamon and vanilla, again, turning it into something that honored her memory. Larry nodded like he understood, but his eyes held that developer glint, as if he was already calculating another approach. From that day on, things between Tamara and me cooled in a way that felt permanent. Our phone calls grew shorter, visits rarer, and when we did talk, the words stayed on the surface, careful, polite, but missing the warmth we once had. I threw myself into fixing up the bakery, sanding the old counters. Grandma had loved testing her recipes late into the night, telling myself this was the right path. But deep down, I felt the first real crack in our family, a fracture that started small but promised to widen over time, and I knew it wouldn't be the last. The bakery became my anchor, a quiet promise to Grandma that I would hold on no matter what came next. Just a few weeks after the funeral, on a winter evening when snow was falling thick and heavy, I was closing up the bakery late, the streets outside already quiet under the blanket of white, when I heard a faint noise from the alley behind the shop. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the dumpster, but then I heard it again, a small shivering sound that didn't belong to an animal. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and stepped out into the biting cold. There, huddled against the wall near the back door, was a 9-year-old girl named Teagan Patel, curled up in a thin jacket that was no match for the South Dakota winter. Her lips blue and her eyes wide with hunger and fear. My heart ached the moment I saw her. I knelt down slowly so I wouldn't scare her more and asked if she was okay. She didn't answer at first, just looked at me with those dark, wary eyes, but when I mentioned the warm bread inside, she nodded slightly. I helped her up. She weighed almost nothing, and brought her into the bakery, locking the door behind us against the storm. I sat her at the counter, wrapped her in one of Grandma's old aprons for extra warmth, and gave her fresh-baked cinnamon rolls still hot from the oven and a bowl of hearty vegetable soup I'd made that afternoon. She ate slowly at first, then faster, as if afraid it might disappear. Watching her, I felt a rush of something protective and tender, the kind of feeling Grandma used to have when she fed neighborhood kids during hard times. Over the next few days, I let her sleep in the storage room, on a cot I set up with extra blankets. She was quiet but polite, thanking me every time I brought food. As we talked more, I discovered how incredibly smart Teagan was. I'd mention a recipe once, and she'd remember every ingredient and step perfectly. She'd watch me calculate costs for supplies, and then suggest quicker ways to add them up in her head, always accurate. Soon she started offering simple but brilliant ideas for the bakery, rearranging the display case to show the best-selling items first, or grouping similar flavors together so customers could find what they wanted faster. Those small changes made a real difference, drawing in more locals who appreciated the thoughtful layout. One regular who noticed the improvements was Juanita Weber, an older customer, a retired real estate lawyer who came in most afternoons for tea and a scone. She took an immediate interest in Teagan, sitting with her at a table and asking gentle questions about books or puzzles the girl liked. Juanita quickly saw the same spark I did and spent time encouraging her, bringing library books or simple math games that Teagan devoured in hours. It warmed me to see them together, like watching a quiet mentorship form right in front of the pastry case. Teagan stayed and helped for a few months, and during that time the bakery felt alive in a new way. More customers came lingering longer, chatting with us both. I taught her basic baking skills: how to fold butter into dough for perfect croissants, how to temper chocolate for decorations, and her quick hands and sharp mind made everything easier. Those months brought light into my days, easing the grief that still lingered after losing Grandma. Having Teagan there filled the shop with laughter and purpose, reminding me why I had fought to keep the place open. The following spring, a kind family from Omaha drove to Sioux Falls to foster and eventually adopt Teagan. Saying goodbye was harder than I expected. She hugged me tight, promising in her serious little voice that she'd never forget what I'd done. As their car pulled away, I stood in the doorway watching until they disappeared, feeling the bakery quieter than it had been in months, but carrying a gentle hope that kindness like this might circle back someday. After Teagan left by car with her new foster family from Omaha, she had left a short handwritten note on the counter the morning they came to pick her up. The paper folded neatly with my name on the outside in her careful child's printing. Inside, she thanked me for the food, the warm place, and the chance to help, ending with a promise that she would come back one day to repay the kindness when she was grown. I slipped that note into the drawer beneath the register, pulling it out on slower days when the bakery felt too large and empty without her energy filling the space. It became a private source of comfort, a reminder that even fleeting connections could leave behind something meaningful and enduring. Not long after her departure, the letters from Larry and Tamara began arriving more frequently, each one outlining a new offer to purchase the lease at a price noticeably lower than the previous. The envelopes were formal, bearing the letterhead of Larry's development company, and the wording remained courteous on the surface, positioning the proposals as thoughtful ways to ease my supposed burdens. Yet reading them alone in the quiet back room after locking up, I felt a growing unease settle over me, a sense that these were not mere suggestions, but calculated steps meant to erode my confidence over time. I organized them into a dedicated folder, labeling it carefully, determined not to let printed words push me into a decision I wasn't ready to make. They also started utilizing relationships at City Hall to submit minor yet persistently irritating zoning complaints reports, citing noise from the oven starting early in the morning, or customers occasionally parking longer than allowed in the shared lot out front. Inspectors appeared without prior notice, equipped with clipboards and measuring tools, asking to record sound levels or document vehicle positions, and although the matters never escalated to actual violations or penalties, the unexpected visits threw off the daily rhythm and left me constantly watchful. It created an atmosphere of ongoing tension, as if the bakery had become subject to scrutiny that lingered just below the surface, wearing away at the peace I had worked hard to maintain. Tamara would drop by the bakery from time to time, selecting a coffee and a pastry, before settling at the counter long enough to inquire about my well-being and the shop's progress. She always framed her questions with apparent concern, gradually steering the conversation toward observations about how much easier life could be if I sold, allowing myself some relief from the constant demands. Her tone carried that familiar, polished quality, but I detected the underlying intent, the subtle expectation that persistence would eventually sway me. Those encounters left me emotionally exhausted, amplifying the emotional distance that had steadily widened between us since Grandma's passing, turning what used to be sisterly visits into something strained and purposeful. Juanita continued her routine stops for afternoon tea, picking up on the subtle changes in my demeanor and the increasing pile of official correspondence tucked behind the counter. One particularly quiet afternoon after the rush had faded and the shop stood empty, we sat together at a small table by the window as daylight softened outside. She took her time explaining the genuine worth embedded in the old lease, focusing especially on the air rights provision that granted control over potential development above the building. She pointed out how those rights could appreciate substantially as downtown Sioux Falls gradually transformed into a more active commercial district, with announcements of new office buildings and retail projects starting to circulate among local business owners. Listening to her measured, experienced perspective provided a much-needed boost, strengthening my belief that clinging to the lease represented not only sentimental attachment, but also the prudent foresight Grandma had built into it decades earlier. The years that followed passed with many hardships, especially through the long and cold winters in South Dakota. The big financial crisis hit hard, wiping out savings for so many and bringing fewer customers through the door as people tightened their belts everywhere. Foot traffic slowed to a trickle some weeks, and I had to cut back on staff handling most shifts alone while watching supplies cost more and sales drop lower. Mornings started earlier to save on electricity nights, ended later cleaning up what little there was, and I learned to stretch every dollar further than I thought possible. The quiet in the bakery during slow hours gave me too much time to think about how close I was to losing it all, the place that had become my whole world after Grandma was gone. Then came the pandemic, closing everything for months and forcing me to pivot to limited takeout just to stay afloat, all while worrying about health and bills piling up in ways I never imagined. I set up a small window for orders, baking less variety to avoid waste, and wore masks long after others stopped, cautious because the shop was my only income. Customers who did come thanked me for staying open, sharing stories of their own struggles over wrapped packages, and those brief exchanges became small anchors in days that blurred together with isolation and uncertainty. Larry used a shell company to buy the building itself, and soon after he raised the rent significantly by claiming minor improvements like repainting or fixing a few fixtures. The increases felt unfair, stretching the budget thinner each time and making it harder to keep the lights on and the ovens running through the freezing months when heating costs soared. I negotiated where I could, but the new demands always came at the worst moments, forcing choices between paying suppliers or covering the higher lease. It added a constant undercurrent of stress, turning what used to be joyful baking into a daily calculation of survival. I came close to closing several times, staring at empty shelves and red numbers in the books, wondering if I could hold on any longer. Those moments alone after closing, with the snow piling against the windows and the silence pressing in, brought waves of doubt that made me question every decision I had made since refusing to sell. But whenever the situation seemed hopeless, an anonymous money order would arrive in the mail, always for the exact amount needed to cover the most pressing expense: a new refrigerator part, emergency repairs, or overdue utilities. Those unmarked envelopes became quiet lifelines, arriving without explanation, but with perfect timing, giving me the breathing room to push forward one more season. I never knew who sent them, but they restored a fragile faith that someone out there still cared about small places like mine. Juanita quietly helped me gather and organize every piece of correspondence, receipt, and complaint notice over the years, building a careful record of the ongoing business interference. She never pushed, just offered steady advice during her visits, reminding me that documentation could matter someday when the time was right. Her calm presence over tea became one of the few constants, a gentle encouragement that kept me from giving up entirely on the idea of justice. Tamara appeared less and less in person, her visits replaced by short phone calls or emails that always circled back to the same suggestion about one last chance to sell. The conversations grew briefer, the silences longer until contact felt more like obligation than connection, leaving me with a hollow ache for the closeness we once shared. I miss the sister who used to laugh with me in Grandma's kitchen, but that version seemed lost somewhere along the way, replaced by distance I didn't know how to bridge. Many years after that, again in a cold December in Sioux Falls, I hung the closing forever sign on the door because I could no longer afford the latest rent demand. The numbers no longer added up no matter how many times I recalculated or cut corners. After exhausting every possible way to stretch the budget further, I accepted that it was time to let go. The bakery, once filled with the comforting scents of fresh dough and vanilla, now stood stripped and silent, the display cases bare, and the ovens cold for good. Walking through the empty space that morning, I touched the worn counter where Grandma had rolled out countless pies, feeling the finality settle over me like the heavy snow outside. Tamara stopped by one last time, stepping in from the snow with a coat that looked new and expensive against the drab interior. She glanced around the bare space and said a few smug words along the lines of, "Finally, you're giving up. You should have sold long ago and avoided all this suffering." Her voice carried a note of satisfaction, as if the outcome proved her right all along and justified every suggestion she had made over the years. I managed a nod, keeping my response short to avoid giving her more satisfaction, and watched her leave without much more than a quick goodbye. The door closed behind her, and the cold air lingered longer than her presence, leaving the shop feeling even emptier. Tamara gone. I sat alone among the empty tables, the weight of everything pressing down until it felt like the end of more than just the shop. The years of holding on, the small victories that kept hope alive, and the constant setbacks that chipped away at it all, led to this quiet moment where acceptance mixed with deep sorrow. I thought about Grandma and how she would have felt seeing the place close, her legacy reduced to packed boxes and faded signs. Tears came unbidden as the snow continued to fall outside, blurring the view through the windows and mirroring the blur in my own eyes from exhaustion and loss. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional creak of the old building settling in the cold. I allowed myself to sit with the grief, remembering the early days when the ovens never cooled and customers lined up for Grandma's special rolls. The bakery had been my anchor through so much change, a place where I poured everything I had left after losing her. Now it was slipping away, and with it the last tangible connection to the life we had built together. The thought brought a fresh wave of sadness, heavy and unavoidable. A black SUV pulled up to the curb amid the swirling flakes, its headlights cutting through the dim evening light and casting long shadows on the snow-covered sidewalk. Two women got out, brushing snow from their coats as they approached the door and stepped inside, bringing a rush of winter air with them that made the empty room feel even colder for a moment. The younger one was tall and confident, dressed in a tailored wool coat that spoke of success and purpose, while the other carried a professional briefcase and moved with purposeful calm, scanning the space briefly before focusing on me. The younger woman looked directly at me, and her face triggered something deep in my memory, those eyes, that shape of smile I hadn't seen in so long. It was Teagan Patel, now fully grown, a successful entrepreneur in sustainable real estate. After selling a startup company she had built from the ground up, and beside her stood her lawyer, Mariana Ramos. Teagan smiled the moment our eyes met, a warm, knowing smile that bridged all the years in an instant, and she said softly that she recognized me right away, her voice carrying the same gentle tone I remembered from childhood conversations over hot chocolate. Teagan revealed then that she had been the one sending those anonymous money orders for more than 10 years, watching from afar as I struggled, and quietly providing the help needed to keep going just a little longer. Her words came gently filled with gratitude for the kindness I had shown her when she had nothing, explaining how that short time in the bakery had given her the belief that people could be good without expecting anything back. The revelation hit me like a wave of warmth in the cold room, turning despair into something close to disbelief and overwhelming relief as pieces of the past suddenly connected in ways I never imagined. Just a few weeks after that day, everything began to change quickly. Teagan shared a brief overview of her journey during one of our first long conversations in the newly quiet bakery. She explained how the kind family had provided the stability she needed after those uncertain early years, giving her a home where she could focus on school without worry. She excelled academically, earning recognition that opened doors to better opportunities, and eventually channeled her sharp mind into starting a company focused on sustainable real estate projects in emerging communities. She sold that startup for a comfortable amount, achieving moderate success that granted her financial independence and the ability to choose meaningful work. But through all the milestones, she emphasized that she never forgot the simple kindness I had shown when she was at her lowest, a few meals, a safe corner, and genuine belief in her potential when the world felt cold. Hearing her speak about it with quiet gratitude touched me deeply, making the long years of struggle feel meaningful in a new way, as if that short time together had planted a seed that grew far beyond the bakery walls into a life of purpose and generosity. Mariana Ramos, the lawyer specializing in lease and real estate disputes, had already prepared a thorough case, using the evidence Juanita and I had collected over the years. From the moment we met in her office, she reviewed the folders with professional precision, pointing out how every rent increase, zoning complaint, and purchase offer formed a clear pattern of systematic interference designed to force a sale. She explained the legal grounds, calmly building confidence that the documentation would hold up under scrutiny. Her expertise and steady approach reassured me, and for the first time, I felt that the careful records we had maintained might actually lead to something fair, a real acknowledgement of the pressure I had endured alone. The lawsuit moved forward steadily at the local court, with hearings scheduled promptly and evidence presented in organized sessions. Mariana handled the proceedings with skill, calling on records and timelines to illustrate the ongoing impact on the business. The judge listened attentively, asking pointed questions that showed understanding of the situation. The outcome came faster than I expected, a decision that brought closure to years of uncertainty. The judge ruled in our favor, voiding all the unreasonable rent hikes and ordering Larry and Tamara to pay $300,000 for the business losses I had suffered over time, plus an additional $100,000 as penalty for the patterned harassment. Receiving the official judgment brought a profound sense of validation, like years of quiet endurance were finally acknowledged by the system, and the financial relief lifted a burden I had carried alone for so long, allowing space for hope to return. Teagan purchased the entire building from Larry's company after they faced serious financial strain from the judgment and related costs that strained their resources significantly. She managed the transaction through her own firm, ensuring everything was transparent and legal. Then she signed a new 99-year lease with me at a symbolic rent of $1 per year, securing the bakery's future without any threat of future increases or interference. That gesture felt like the fullest circle of kindness, turning what could have been permanent loss into lasting security, and giving me the freedom to envision the shop's next chapter without constant fear. I decided to establish a small fund to support other independent female business owners in the area, using part of the settlement to offer modest grants for equipment upgrades or training courses. It seemed the right way to pay forward the help I had received, extending the spirit of the bakery beyond my own story, and helping others build their dreams in the community Grandma had loved so much. 1 year later, during a rare warm summer in Sioux Falls, the bakery had been renamed Knight Community Bakery with a fresh sign above the door and an expanded back area dedicated to serving free meals for anyone who needed them. The transformation started small with a few extra tables and donated supplies from neighbors who had heard about the changes. I added a small classroom space where I taught baking classes to children from tougher backgrounds, passing on the recipes Grandma had loved and watching their faces light up as dough rose in the ovens. The kids came after school, hands eager to mix and knead, and their laughter filled the room in ways that healed old wounds I didn't even know were still open. The place buzzed with new energy, locals stopping by not just for pastries, but to volunteer or share stories, turning what was once a struggling shop into a true community hub that felt alive in ways I had only dreamed of during the hardest times. People who had been customers for years now became friends, bringing their own recipes or helping with deliveries, creating a network of support that made the bakery more than a business. It became a place where everyone felt they belonged. I had cut off all contact with Tamara completely. She faced considerable financial difficulties after the lawsuit, forced to downsize her lifestyle and deal with the consequences of the judgment, but she never reached out, never offered an apology or any attempt at reconciliation. The silence from her side brought a strange peace, allowing me to close that chapter without lingering bitterness or unresolved questions, focusing instead on the relationships that truly mattered in my life. Without her occasional calls or emails, the days felt lighter, free from the tension that had hung over me for so long, and I found myself able to look forward without glancing back. One evening, when the last winter snow was melting and the air carried a crisp chill, I noticed a small figure huddled outside the back door as I locked up. It was a boy around 10 years old named Blake, shivering in a jacket too thin for the lingering cold, his eyes reflecting the same quiet hunger I remembered from long ago. He didn't say much at first, just nodded when I asked if he was okay, his hands clenched against the chill as he glanced at the light spilling from the windows. I brought him inside without hesitation, sitting him at the counter and baking fresh rolls while heating a pot of hearty soup on the stove. The familiar scents filled the room as we talked softly about nothing important. At first, the weather, his favorite foods, and I felt that same protective warmth rise up again, the kind that had started everything 20 years earlier. Watching him eat with careful gratitude, savoring each bite as if it might be his last for a while, reminded me how one small gesture could change a trajectory, creating ripples that might return in unexpected ways. Blake opened up a little more as the meal went on, sharing bits about his tough days, and I listened without judgment, offering the same quiet welcome I had given before. Kindness is not a calculated investment, but sometimes it returns in the biggest way, right when you need it most. And that is my entire story, from one small act on a freezing winter night to the perfect circle of gratitude and redemption 20 years later. The lesson I want to share with you through this story is this: never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness, no matter how small. Genuine kindness, given without expecting anything in return, can plant seeds that change an entire life, and sometimes it comes back to lift you up when you think you've lost everything. At the same time, stand firm in protecting what you believe is right, no matter how lonely or difficult the road. Persistence, along with careful documentation and seeking truth, will eventually bring justice. And most importantly, family isn't always blood. It's the people who choose to stand by you, who choose kindness when you need it most. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to this story all the way to the end. The fact that you took the time to stay with me through all the emotions truly means the world to me. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below, sharing your thoughts. What act of kindness has changed your life? Or what are you feeling now after hearing the whole story? I read every single comment and can't wait to hear from you. If you enjoyed it, feel free to share this video so the message of kindness can spread further. For now, thank you and see you in the next story. Wishing you a day filled with warmth and love.